which are a particular like of me. I just love looking at birds, and especially in the springtime when so many of them come back. And we're going to focus on their feathers because those are, again, are really cool. So I'm going to start off by sharing a presentation so you can watch that part of it, and then I'll stop in between and do a couple little demonstrations, and then at the very end we're going to do some drawing. So you can draw along with me, or you can just watch and then draw later on. Okay, are we all ready? So I can only see, hi Sloan. Oh, I love your background, that's cool, as long as it's at the beach there. All right, so I'm going to move on. So if you live in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, there's a lot of wildlife, even if you live in, you do not live in the suburbs, but even in the city proper. So there are lots of birds and squirrels, and in my area we have raccoons and coyotes and bobcats and all kinds of things, but in particular birds. There are a lot of birds. So these are a few birds that you see in the area where we live, and you can probably see a lot of these in your area. So let's see if you recognize some of these. Give me a thumbs up if you know what this is. All right, so we got a red cardinal there. Do you know what this is? So that's a dove. And in Texas, we have mockingbirds. I don't know if they have those in Virginia. We do have these just about everywhere. You know what these are? Give me a thumbs up if you know what these are. Oh, those are blue jays. This is a red-tailed hawk, and I see a lot of these around my house. This is a woodpecker, and this is an English sparrow. So do you see these around your house? Because I've seen these, and I know I've seen these just about everywhere. Anybody know what this is? Give me a thumbs up if you know what this is. If you live in Texas, you know what this is. Well, this is a grackle. And the grackles are the ones that make those horrible, horrible sounds. But they're really interesting bird, and they're really big bird. And in springtime, those are the ones that you see fluffing up their feathers. You know, they're trying to get the attention of all the lady grackles. And then you have ducks, you have mallards. Some mallards stay year round, some will leave. And then you have birds that leave and come back. In Texas, sometimes we will have geese that stay year round, but most of the time the robins leave. And I always know it's spring when I see the robins. All right, so these are just a few birds that you can see, and you might even have seen some different ones in your area. All right, so you know what? I forgot to do something that I was going to do. I'm going to set a timer so that I don't talk too much. All right. So, feathers. Feathers are really, really, really cool. And, okay, so let me kind of look at my script. So they can vary by bird. And small, I'm actually going to go back to the other slide. So small songbirds like a sparrow, which is probably about 4 or 5 inches tall, probably more like 4 inches. They can have between 1,500 and 3,000 feathers. That's a lot of feathers. Eagles and hawks, this kind, they can have between 5,000 and 8,000 feathers. That's a lot. Swans, which I don't have a picture of, can have as many as 25,000 feathers on their bodies. Hummingbirds have the fewest feathers at 1,000, while penguins have perhaps the densest. That means that's a lot of feathers in one space, okay? And they can have 100 feathers per square inch. So take your hand and make a little circle about this big. Okay, so imagine 100 feathers in that space right there, in that area. And then multiply that by the penguin's body. And those density of those feathers, that is what helps the penguin be able to live in all of those cold places. So, all right, so feathers are actually the heaviest thing on the bird's body, especially if the bird is a bird that flies. So all of these birds fly. Birds that don't fly are like the ostrich and the emu. Those are just, they're just on the ground and they don't have flight. So a bird's bones, you know, are fairly hollow and very light. So the feathers actually cover all of the bird's body, and they are the heaviest thing on the body. It's really important for them. So feathers have something in common with us. They are made from a protein called keratin, which is the same thing that our hair is made out of. So you have that in common with birds, but also keratin is what we have in our fingernails and claws and horns, which we don't have. But it's the same kind of material. So imagine as one of your hairs as a feather, has the same kind of makeup as feathers do. However, feathers are obviously very different from our hair. So this is a diagram of what a feather looks like. So they have the center part right here, which is called the calamus. The end part of this is hollow. And they actually call this the quill too. It's down here. This is the part that people many, many years ago used to use for writing because it's hollow. So you could put ink in there and write with it. It's not hollow all the way up, but it does have some very, very light material in there. Then you have the vein, which is this part right here, and the rachis. Now, if you could take a little bit and you had a microscope to look through it, this is what you would see. Okay, so it has these barbs, and that's what makes the feathers stick together. Have you ever seen a bird kind of takes its beak and it preens all the feathers? Well, what it's doing is it's putting all of those barbs back together, okay? And all of these interlock. So there's something similar, and I'm going to show you a feather in a little bit. Do you know what this is in here? Like a zipper? So that's kind of how the feathers zip up and zip down. So when you see a bird doing that, what he's doing is, one, he's making sure that the feathers are nicely oiled. He's also making sure that all of those little barbs and barbules and hooks are all zipped back together, okay? So look at your arm, and you have hairs on your arms, right? Right? You have hair on your arms? All right, so do you know how the hairs grow out? They just don't stick on the top of your arms, right? They have a little follicle that the hair grows out of. And so do feathers, okay? So what's really cool about the feathers is that there are also muscles, and the bird can actually control the individual feathers, all right? Okay, so I'm actually going to skip that and we're going to go back to that. So I want you to watch these birds fly, and they fly in slow motion. I want you to see what's happening to their feathers. You notice how they're moving? That's just not the air manipulating. That's actually the bird manipulating the feathers. See how they move?
We can't see your video.
Oh, you can't?
No.
Why not?
I don't know. Right. Try using the share screen and pick the actual video in the share screen.
Okay, so can you see it now?
Yep, we can see it now.
Okay. So it'll do it again. These are macaws, which we don't have in America, but they are really cool birds. Can you see how the feathers are moving? Isn't that really cool? Notice how the wings go back. They just don't go up and down. All right, so I'm going to stop that, and let me see. I'm going to stop sharing that and go back to my PowerPoint. All right. Okay, so I'm going to stop sharing that for a minute, and I'm going to plug in a camera, a different camera, and I have some feathers over here, and we're going to look at them. So grab the camera. Hopefully it's going to cooperate. All right, so I have some feathers over here. Let's get this a little bit clearer. I think that's the best I can get it. So how many of you have ever been walking around and you've picked up feathers? Have you ever picked up feathers and seen them? Well, did you know that it's actually illegal to collect feathers that you find outside? It's something called the Migratory Bird Act, and that's to prevent people from trying to take feathers from wild birds instead of just finding them on the ground. So all the feathers that I'm going to show you today actually came from the craft store. And usually the feathers at craft stores are either turkey, ducks, or chickens. So those are domesticated birds that we have on our farms, and those are okay to have. But if you find a feather outdoors, leave it there, take a picture of it, sit down and sketch it, but you're not really allowed to keep them. So I wanted to show you, this is the same feather right here. I had a different one that I cut up. So can you see how the end of it, which is this part right here, how it's hollow? Can you see that? Let me see if I can get it. Go straight up. All right, so try and get it an angle. So this is where they would have cut and they would have used it for writing. Pretty cool, huh? And then this is the other end part, and you can see it's not quite hollow. It does have like some white keratin fiber inside. Okay, so we talked about how a bird preens its feathers, and we talked about the barbules and the barbs. So if you have a magnifying glass, you can look a little closer at the parts of the feather. But to really see the barbs, you need a microscope because you have to get really close. So a bird, if you take the feather and you pull it apart, it really resists. See how it's resisting? So those barbs want to grab hold of each other. So I think of it as a zipper, but something else you could compare it to would be Velcro. Give me a thumbs up if you've ever used Velcro. So think of Velcro as like a bird's feather, how they stick together. So a bird, if that comes apart, what they do is they take their beaks and they zip it back up. Okay? So they have all these different kinds of feathers. The outer feathers are there to keep them warm and dry. So one of the birds that would be really important to stay dry would be a duck, right? Right? It's got to stay dry at the time. So I'm going to show you a little experiment here to show you how that works. So I have a little piece of paper and I have some just vegetable oil, okay? And I'm going to start off by just taking some oil and I'm going to put it on this paper, and this is just some drawing paper. If you want to do this at home, you could use copy paper. All right, so I'm going to oil that up, and then I'm going to leave that for a minute. And then I'm going to take a piece of paper that doesn't have any oil in it. So I have some water here, and I made my water blue so you could see it. And you can see kind of how it sits on it. Eventually, it's going to soak into that paper. It may run off a little bit, only because that's the way the paper is. But you can see how it's kind of sticking to it a little bit, and it's going to soak in, and eventually this piece of paper is going to be really wet. Well, that wouldn't be very good for the bird, would it? Right? All right, so let's see, now that we've oiled this paper, what's going to happen? Get a little closer. Oh, look at that. It just runs right off, doesn't it? Because we know that oil and water don't mix. Look at that. All right, so that's also going to happen with this feather. Okay, so I'm going to take some of this. I'm going to put it on the feather, and you see how it just rolls right off? That's pretty cool, isn't it? So now you know how the bird can stay warm and dry. These feathers are oiled, and that's part of the bird's job, is one, to make sure that all the feathers are all zipped up, but also to make sure that they oil them and make sure the oils from their bodies are on their feathers. Okay? All right, so I'm going to unplug that camera, and let's see if I covered everything that I wanted to talk about. Okay, so I'm going to go back to that presentation. All right. Click on this. There you go. Nope, that's not what I want. All right, so there are 7 kinds of feathers on a bird. We're going to look at 4 different ones that are really different. So you have a flight feather. So look at the very center of it, right here, the rachis. Do you notice how there's more of the vein on one side, whoops, than there is on the other? Can you see that? Give me a thumbs up if you see that. Can you see that, Sayer? Yeah, so a flight feather has less on one side than on the other, and that helps channel the air and make sure there's less drag. It makes the bird more aerodynamic. So when you see a feather like this, then you know that this is a flight feather. It's asymmetrical, which means it's not the same on both sides of that center rachis. Okay, so this one is a tail feather. You can see that the rachis is more centered, and it's fairly symmetrical. It has just about the same type or same amount on the other side. So tail feathers are important because they help with stability and control. So if the bird's flying, they have to, did you see when the macaw, how they were flying, how the tail feathers kind of spread apart, went back together, and maybe they were moving? So that helped keep them stable. Think about an airplane. It has like a fin at the top. So that's the purpose of the tail feathers, okay? And then we have what's called a semi-plume. You can see how it's kind of like this one at the top, but the other part is more fuzzy or more downy. So these help the bird stay warm and also helps it smooth out. So these feathers right here would be underneath the more solid feathers, okay? And then you have the downy feathers, which are completely underneath. And the purpose of the downy feathers are to keep the bird warm. Can you see the difference between all 4 feathers? Yes? Okay. All right. So now that we've looked at some feathers, I wanted to introduce you to an artist. And this is John James Audubon. And John James Audubon was, at the time, they used to call him a naturalist. He was also an artist, and he was an ornithologist. And an ornithologist is a person who studies birds. And he actually traveled all around the known United States in the early 1800s. And he made all of these paintings of birds. And I actually have, I'm going to pull it up because it's huge, the book of his paintings. Okay. Now the original paintings were life size. So the original ones could be anywhere from, you know, teeny tiny like a hummingbird, or 5 feet tall like a heron. All right. So he did 435 paintings of 497 birds. Some of the paintings had more than one bird in them. He even discovered 25 new birds. So even though he looked at the birds as an artist would, he also looked at the birds as a scientist would. And he wanted to make sure that he got all the details correct in the bird. So he actually had real birds to look at. Of course, they were not alive, but in the early 1800s, most people did a lot of hunting. And so they were able to have the birds. Nowadays, we're not allowed to just go out, you know, and kill any bird. But he did have all of those. So he had, in order to do those paintings and have lots of details, he had to be a good observer. How many of you are good observers? Are you good observers? You look closely at things? Yes? All right. So let's look at a few of his paintings and let's see if you recognize some of the birds. All right. So we've got this one. Do you recognize it? I showed it to you earlier. So these are mockingbirds. Okay. And like I said, he tried to show realistic situations. If you look very closely, there's actually a snake in here that's trying to get to the nest. And mockingbirds are really ferocious. They're very, very, very strong, and they protect their nest. So here they are battling. All right, do you recognize this one from the picture? Yeah, so there's one of our woodpeckers. All right. So fortunately, Audubon traveled around. He painted all these birds, which is a good thing because some birds don't exist anymore. All the ones I'm showing you still do, but there are some birds who are now extinct. All right, do you recognize this one? How about you, Sayer? Do you recognize these? Yeah, so those are the mallard ducks. And how about these right here? So those are the robins. Okay, see how he drew the feathers? And he's got the chest feathers. Most of the time, the feathers on the chest are much smaller and softer. And did you know there are even specialized feathers around the bird's eyes? So if you ever get a chance to look closely at a real bird, you can see all these, they're not really eyelashes, they're just special feathers to help the bird's eyes. All right, how about this one? You recognize this one? No, but it's a sparrow. Maybe it may not be exactly like the house sparrow I showed you, but it is a sparrow. Of course, we know this one, right? Yeah, so that's the blue jay. Okay, how about these right here? Do you know these, Sayer? Yeah. How about you, Lachlan? No? Well, these are the doves. These are doves. And then, of course, beautiful, beautiful redbirds. Okay, this is the lady redbird. They're not as brightly colored as the male, and that's pretty true in most species. All right, what's this? Got a goose. And this one is the one that makes all those noises, the grackle. Okay. All right, so you want to do some drawing with me? Okay. Do you have some supplies handy? No? Well, I'll give you a minute. If you have pencil and a piece of paper, that's really all you need. And then if you want to use something else later on, you can, okay? So I'm going to stop sharing this and go back to my other camera. All right, I'm gonna move all my stuff over. All right, you ready, Lachlan? Let me grab my camera. Okay, so I have those same 4 feathers that I showed you at the beginning. I have this one, which I'm pretty sure is a turkey feather, because I don't think it's, I think it's too big to be a chicken feather. And then these are probably some kind of chicken feather. So here we have that downy one. Okay, look how fuzzy that is. So, so soft. So if you've ever had a blanket that has down in it, that's what's inside of it. I can't have that because it makes me sneeze, but that's what's inside. If you have a down coat or a blanket that's a down blanket, I'm gonna make this a little bit clearer, then that's what that looks like. And then we have the semi-plume. Okay, let me get on something dark. And again, you've got this really fuzzy part that's going to help the bird stay warm. And then you've got the stiffer, waxier part up here. And then this is that tail feather. And I think this one's natural. I think this white one, the black part of it has been dyed just to make it look more interesting, because these all came from the craft store. Okay, so I'm going to stick these up here. And then these are the pictures that I did. So this one is crayon on brown paper. Okay. This one is just a gel pen. So you can draw with anything. Gel pen, ink pens, I mean, whatever you've got in your house that's going to make a mark is going to be great for drawing. Okay. And then this is that big white and black one. I did this one with colored pencil on colored paper. You can use construction paper, cardstock, you know, whatever you've got at your house. And then the pencil one is the one I'm going to do with you. Okay. So I'm going to go back to this one real quick though, because as I was drawing the black feather, I don't know if you can see, where's my pencil? You see how it's kind of fuzzy here? Those are just little barbs. So it's important, if you want to be the type of person who's a naturalist, you want to be interested in nature, that one, that you be a good observer, and two, that you take your time to try to draw some of the things that you see, like Audubon did, because drawing something helps you pay attention to it, makes you look at it more closely. And that's why I've been drawing feathers. I always had this with my students when I was an art teacher. And when we studied Audubon, the first thing we did is we drew the feathers. All right, so I'm going to do the pencil one, and I'm going to go back to this one because I really like this one right here. Okay, I'll turn it this way. And I'm going to grab another piece of paper. All right, you ready? Okay, so first of all, I'm going to look very carefully, and I'm going to turn it this way because the camera wants to be upside down. And I'm going to start with the center part, this ratchet part. But before I start, I want to take a closer look at it. And if you have a magnifying glass, that can be really, really invaluable for you to look more closely. Okay, so that's the tail feather. Did you know that owls have special feathers, flight feathers at the tips of their flight feathers? And this one's not, this one is a flight feather because you can see it's uneven. But on an owl's feathers, the tips of these are kind of raggedy. And the reason for that is they hunt at night. And the creatures that they hunt, of course, don't want to be caught. So an owl has to fly very, very quietly. So they actually have special wings. So I'm going to look at the center part, and I'm going to be drawing upside down because that's the way my camera works. And I'm going to just start sketching that center part. And this one has a little bit of curve to it. I'm going to make my line darker. Can everybody see what I'm doing okay? I want to make sure, because make sure that you see what I see. Okay. And then I noticed that the bottom part of this is wider than the top part. So I'm going to start. I'm going to make that wider. And then as I get closer to the top, I'm going to bring my lines closer together. Okay. All right. So as I look at my feather here, it's just like with the big one. It does have those little individual barbules and barbs, and I can see what direction they're going. They kind of curve up from the center part, from the rachis. So I want to get the shape of the feather. So I'm actually going to draw what I notice as the outside shape, and I'm not going to do it real dark because I'm going to get rid of that line later on, or I'm going to try to blend it in. I'm going to leave this bottom part alone. I'm not going to do this part yet. Okay. So right now I just want to kind of get the shape of the feather. And I notice I've got some raggedy edges right here where the barbules have come apart. So I'll get back to those. Okay. Can you see that? I'm trying to do light enough because I want to get rid of that later on. Huh. There, I can see your ceiling. All right, so once I have that, then I know that the little barbules are kind of curved lines that go into the center. So I'm going to start putting some of those lines in. And I can go outside my shape a little bit if I need to. The nice thing about drawing from nature is that nature is never perfect. So you never have to worry about if what you're drawing doesn't look exactly like what you started with. I'm gonna get my camera a little closer and a little clearer. I just cannot. Okay. All right. I'm going to put those in. I'm going to go all the way down. I'm not going to worry about any of these little dark areas right now. I'm just going to try to put in those lines. Okay. All right. So I'm going to let you sketch a little bit. You want to show me what you have so far? You want to hold yours up and show me on the camera? Let's see what you have so far. Very cool, Sayer. Lachlan, do you want to show? You don't have to if you don't want to. Okay, that's fine. All right, so I'm going to keep going in. I'm going to look and see the kind of overlap here a little bit. I'm going to put those in. And I'm just going to sketch, put those lines in all the way down. Now, if you get to part of the feather, like I noticed this feather, I don't know if you can see it, it kind of overlaps. So I'm going to go up and do this little part right here. That part kind of came and then overlapped, and then I'll get back to that. So when I get to that, I'm going to stop and jump over that. So I have kind of an overlapping look to it. Okay. And this one actually has some more vertical lines. All right, I'm going to let you continue doing those, and I'm going to talk about this bottom part right here. So as I drew these lines, you notice that they were a lot straighter and firmer. Okay. You know what? Hang on just 1 minute. I'm going to see, I can get this camera on here and see if this looks better. Okay. All right. Okay, so you see how fuzzy these are? So as an artist, I have to use a different kind of line, okay? So for these lines, they were a little bit firmer and straighter. But as I get down here, I want to take my pencil and kind of just do a really quick little line. I'm not going to press down real hard. And that gives me the feeling of these fuzzy, more downy lines. See how that makes them look fuzzier? All right, so I'm going to continue on here. And then I have this part. Right here that came up and was different. So I'm going to draw that separately. Now, once you have the feather all drawn in, then you can go back and you can put in some of the details that you can see on the side. You can see how it's got, it's got some speckles and it's got these dark patterns right here. So if you notice, a lot of birds, in fact, all birds really have different colors and different patterns. Did you know that sometimes a bird's color is dependent on what they eat? Like flamingos are pink because of what they eat. So some birds, it's really not so much the colors they're born with, but what they eat can determine their colors. All right, how are we doing? We've got about 11 minutes left, okay? I'm gonna let you keep drawing. And then once you have in all the feathers that you want, then I went back into the center, the ratchet part right here, and that was pretty dark. It wasn't white like this feather, like the center of this feather is very white, okay? So I actually went back in and I filled that in and made that darker. And I'm just drawing with a regular number 2 pencil. If you really want to get into some drawing, you can go and pick up some drawing pencils. Number 2 is what you mostly use at school. And it's not too soft and not too hard. It's kind of the just right type of graphite that's in it. And so you can experiment with different pencils. Now, Audubon would have done a lot of this. He did a lot of sketching. And in fact, some of the paintings that he did, you can actually see on the side where he did the feet separate because he was trying to get the feet right. So he actually left them right on the painting because even though he did eventually start selling these artworks as prints, his goal was to capture as much of the detail of the bird as possible and to get it correct. So when people looked at the bird, they recognized it for what it was. All right, so once I have the feathers in, then I just kind of did a little zigzaggy line going out from the center to put in those dark areas. Okay, and there were a few down here too. Okay. All right, so while you're working on this one, do you need me to keep the feather up? Are you looking at this feather or do you have your own feathers? Give me a thumbs up if you need this feather. Are you drawing this one? Okay, I'll leave it up, but I wanted to talk to you about using some of the other art materials. So I'll give you a minute to keep drawing on that one, and then I'm going to grab the other papers and some other supply. So if you do a really good drawing of a feather, they can be really pretty and you can actually put them in a frame and hang them up in your room. If you decide to use the colors, you can get back, so I could go back in on top of this pencil, actually with some colored pencils, and add in some brown just right on top of my colored pencil. Everybody's concentrating so hard. I think we need to put the bird sounds back on. All right, so I'll put this back in a minute, but I wanted to show you, give you a few other tips. So colored pencils are great. You can use it on white paper, or I like using it on colored paper. Of course, crayons. I'm sure everyone has a box of crayons at their house. And this is just a gel pen, okay? So the gel pen, you could make a really strong line, okay? But you can also make those really small little feathery lines too. So if I'm doing those downy feathers, then I want to do kind of a short, sketchy line, okay? I like gel pens. I think they're fun, but you could draw also with an ink pen. If you have an ink pen at your house, I always carry a couple in my purse when I'm out running around because it gives me something to draw with, okay? And then you have crayons. And I'm going to use okay, lost my picture. All right, so I'm going to use white on here. And crayons kind of the same way. If you push down hard, you're going to get a really strong line. Okay, so again, if you need those little fuzzy downy feathers, then you want to do more of a softer stroke, and that gives you those downy feathers. The crayons also have this ability to blend. And if you're drawing on smooth paper, I'm going to grab, then that's really fun too. So I'm going to take and put a little bit of green in here to kind of demonstrate. And then I can go back in with my white, make it lighter. So if you have some colors in a feather you're looking at and you don't have the same colors in your crayon box, then you can make your own. So those are some tips for using crayons to draw feathers. Okay, and then the last one are the colored pencils. And they don't need to be a fancy kind. I think I bought these at Target. Again, if you push down kind of hard, you're going to get that really strong line, which is good for some parts of the feather. And then you've got the same kind of stroke for making those little wispy lines for the downy part of the feathers. And again, just like colored pencils, I mean, just like the crayons, you can also blend. So I'm going to put some brown in here. And then I can blend back on top of it. So I can make whatever colors I want. Okay? So these are pictures that I did. So here's the gel pen. And the more lines I put in one place, the darker it's going to be. So I noticed the feather that I was looking at that it was really, really black in the center. I think my black feather floated away somewhere. So I tried to show that, and the top part was a little bit more straight. But see how I tried? I looked really closely, and I noticed how the feathers branched out. So they do have, this is what we call branching. So it's kind of like a tree where you have the center part and then you have all the branches. And then here is the white crayon on brown paper. Okay, and again, I was getting those little barbs in there. And then the colored pencil. I didn't, doesn't matter if the color kind of shows through, and then the dark part. Okay. All right, so we have a few more minutes. I'm going to move all this. I'll put the feather back that everybody was drawing. I'll give you a little bit more time. So I think that you guys got an email with some links in it. So one is a link to where you can view all of John James Audubon's paintings, and they're just fabulous, just really cool, and you can learn a lot about different kinds of birds. The other link is to a place where you can look at feathers, and you have the ability to zoom in and look really, really closely at the feathers. So if you don't have the magnifying glass or you don't have any feathers, that is a place where you could go to look more at them. And then the third link was to a book on the birds of Texas. So you can open up that pamphlet and it tells you a little bit more about birds, the birds that live in Texas. Okay. All right. So that's my part. And I think if we want to unmute everybody,